If we look at what is happening now, the trend of the devaluation of our currency, the naira, has continued with the 2021 budget, with the projection relying on an exchange rate of 379 naira to $1. The budget itself is pegged on $40 per barrel, which means that the country will continue to remain vulnerable to uncertainties in the global oil market. More worrisome is that the level of borrowings by the Buhari regime continues to remain unprecedented. Thus, of the 13.8 trillion naira 2021 budget, a projected 3.1 trillion naira, about a quarter at 25%, is expected to go into debt servicing. In this kind of economic environment, the worsening of the social conditions of Nigerians should be expected, with the Nigerian Economic Report already projecting a 30% increase in the unemployment rate in an economy begging for the revival of factories and industries to create employment. The next evidence of the bended knees, because that is the, if you call it parable or the cliche I'm using, is that Nigeria is on bended knees, which I will briefly touch upon, is that of continuing corruption as more manifested in the oil sector. In this regard, we should recall that for a long time, this government said that the dubious oil subsidy system, through which the ruling caste had been feeding fat on the populace, had been maintained despite initially claiming that it had been removed. It is only now that the chicken has come home to roost, and the government has now admitted that it has indeed been paying subsidy without Nigerians knowing to whom these subsidies have been paid, while the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation continues to operate like a parallel central bank. With such opacity that it continuously remains unaccountable for the funds it borrows and the funds it spends. As a matter of fact, the first audited financial statement of the NNPC covering the year 2018 was only published this year after 43 years of existence. So in 43 years of NNPC, we only have audited account for just 1 year, 2018. But nothing is more glaring about the failure of the NNPC than its inability to fix the country's dilapidated refineries or build new ones. The major reason for the country's continued reliance on importation to meet domestic fuel consumption. It is under the guise of the removal of subsidy that the prices of petroleum has now been increased again, in addition to the already sky-high increase in the price of diesel and kerosene. Tragically, a Labour leadership, under its own bended and deformed ideological and political needs, has gone on to agree to the increases and the deregulation of the oil sector after it had issued a strike notice for the reversal, even without the decency of going back to obtain the mandate of its organs, the National Executive Council and the National Working Committee, based on the subsisting resolution that Labour was opposed to deregulation. The Ayuba-led NLC has therefore invariably emboldened the Buhari regime to continue to inflict anti-working class and anti-poor economic policies on the masses, including higher electricity tariffs, which takes us to another example of the bended knees state of Nigeria. And I want to start this session. I'm looking at the electricity sector now to describe the bended knee state. And so Fela sang, "White man rule us for many years, we get electric constantly. Our people come take over, they come build Kianji Dam. They build it down, finish, electricity console. 1 year, 2 years, 10 years, up till now, no electricity for town. Just like that, just like that, just like that." That was Fela Anikulapo Kuti in the 1980s on the state of epileptic power supply, as referenced by me in the chapter where I analyzed one of his numbers, just like that, in my book, Fela, Yesterday's Message as Today's Reality. Fela at that time was just referring to a single hydroelectricity project at a time when investments in the power sector had not run into trillions of naira as we now have it for a sector that essentially remains dysfunctional. We should recall that at the inception of the Goodluck Jonathan government in 2011, $16 billion was said to have already been expended on the power sector by the Obasanjo and Yar'Adua governments. The Buhari government, meanwhile, is said to have spent 1.7 trillion naira on the electricity sector within a 3-year period, according to Premium Times of January 23, 2020, quoting the Kaduna State Governor, El Rufai. Yet, with all these trillions, Nigerians' generating capacity continues to over around 7,000 megawatts. A figure which would sound like joke in a country like South Africa, where less than 40,000 megawatts will be bad news. So we know that the sector has been privatized, and most of these electricity companies are actually fronts and cronies of erstwhile rulers of the country. So in that sector too, we see Nigeria on bended knees. The education sector, Nigeria remains on bended knees. The strikes of ASU for the funding of university education and other unions in the tertiary education sector, I think, are pointers, to this. And as a matter of fact, the corruption which we speak of in the larger society has actually pervaded the campuses amidst collapse of values generally. And you know that these days, to become a vice chancellor is now a do or die battle, just like our politicians engage in do or die battle to get into office. One that sometimes lead to the result of the religious or the fetish. These days, those who want to become vice chancellors, can even go on 30-day fasting on the hills. And Juju Maestro, Sonny Ade, could not have imagined that vice chancellorship candidates will one day carry fetish concussions when he sang that song. So it's too bad. It has now become kurukere, odile alawo, kurukere, odile onishegun, just to become vice chancellors. To round off this segment of the discourse, let me state that the strident calls for restructuring that has greeted the 68th independence anniversary of Nigeria clearly shows that one of the reasons Nigeria remains on bended knees is our unresolved national question. And I once noted in another write-up that among sections of the ruling class, they talk about restructuring or alleged marginalization when they lose out in the power game. But we must also acknowledge that echoes of restructuring have been heard among ordinary Nigerians, including elements of working class and youth activists, some of whom have been involved in struggles against military rule and against anti-working masses policies of civilian rulers. Some of them are also saying Nigeria should be divided along tribal lines. But for this group of Nigerians, unlike the politicians, it is because they are frustrated with the failure of successive civilian governments, especially since 1999, to fundamentally affect our lives, for the better. And like I said before, education and healthcare are also not just there. But Nigerians are also worried about other explosions, the Boko Haram sect, the position of Sharia, the environmental degradation, the suppression of the Igbos and the rest of them. And so you have a cacophony of voices calling for restructuring. And I think that these calls are themselves evidence that Nigeria continues to rest precariously on bended knees. So having done this exercise so far by looking at Nigeria on bended knees, let us now look at Akele and the struggles to straighten Nigeria's bended knees. The comatose state of Nigeria has never been to the satisfaction of the vast majority of Nigerian peoples. And it is in the context of their struggles, particularly in the post-independence, the military, and the post-military eras, that we can best situate the historical relevance of the life and times of Comrade Akele's activism. If at different stages of the country's evolution, the Nigerian mass organizations have risen to reject their conditions and demand for their liberation and emancipation, it is to the credit of the likes of Comrade Akele, who, whatever might be his shortcomings, never kept silent in the face of tyranny. I think we should applaud him for that.